same time, another student organizer was told that he was denied an internship at Human Rights First because of the fact that the organization, founded by Michael Posner, who also wrote a letter in support of Harold Coe, condemned students for signing the petition and urged students to withhold their support, essentially was told that he was not eligible for an internship at this organization because they had seen his name on the petition. And in addition, Dean Morrison, in a meeting with myself and a few other organizers, accused us of spewing vitriol unseen in the law school and of inflicting wounds that will not heal. So these are just a few of the many instances of repression with which students and I were met in connection with our authoring and signing the statement of no confidence in Harold Coe. So in seeking to understand this highly aggressive and belligerent response from some NYU faculty and members of the administration, it occurred to us that Harold Coe's defenders were individuals who had themselves worked for the US government and in that capacity played a role in perpetuating and defending our government's crimes. So for instance, Dean Trevor Morrison, by his own admission, worked on, quote, reforming rather than seeking to abolish military commissions during his time as associate counsel to President Obama. This was in 2009. He's also defended the US bombing of Libya in 2011, as did Harold Coe, who argued for why, the interpretation of hostilities should be construed broadly to essentially allow the US to continue to drop bombs on Libya and to do so in compliance with the War Powers Resolution. This from a human rights respecting person. And Mr. Posner, meanwhile, served as the State Department Assistant Secretary for State, the Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. And during this time, Mr. Posner, as well as Mr. Coe, expressed no support whatsoever for Haiti's prosecution of Duvalier for crimes against humanity. This is despite the State Department's well-documented noxious interference into the internal affairs of Haiti on numerous other matters. Yet on this most important human rights matter, they opted to remain silent. In addition, according to WikiLeaks cables published by The Nation and other newspapers, the U.S. State Department, during both Michael Posner's and Harold Coe's time there, aggressively blocked a minimum wage increase for Haitian workers between 2009 and 2014. Their participation in this effort needs to be investigated, but what's clear is that neither of them resigned from the State Department or voiced any critique of this effort during their time there, despite the fact that this was a criminal and human rights violating act. So in light of all of this, we realized that, these are the individuals who were rallying to Coe's defense. And in defending Harold Coe, they were also defending themselves in some ways. We also reflected upon the fact that those in government who defend drone attacks, whether in Pakistan, Libya, Somalia, or Yemen, who justify wars, whether in Iraq or Libya, who block minimum wage increases for Haitian workers, who aggressively attack whistleblowers and transparency activists like Julian Assange, who essentially advocate for the killing of U.S. citizens without notice, due process of law, fundamental constitutional guarantees, expect to waltz comfortably back into the academy from government after having committed crimes such as these, and they demand not only silence, but also adulation. Harold Coe was a distinguished scholar in residence. We were told we should be grateful for him to be there, to learn from him. So this is the phenomenon that we actually sought to unmask and to raise our voices against. Those who condemned our efforts told us that Harold Coe was a fighter for human rights, told us that he pushed for change from within, who we were told that it was better to have him there than someone else. We were told that the U.S., that he advanced a human rights approach to targeted killing. And so our response to this was fairly simple. For us, by focusing the debate about the morality and the legality of Harold Poe's actions on whether or not they were worse than what someone else's actions would have been, is not only unhelpful because it's a hypothetical exercise, but it also prevents us from imagining other models for government and human rights lawyering, models where people opt to resign rather than continue to remain in a government position and facilitate and legitimate human rights abuses. So we essentially, this was the effort that we undertook, and so we are still circulating the petition. And I brought a few flyers that I'll leave here. If you would like to sign the petition or to learn more about our effort, you can pick them up. Thanks so much.
Our theme this morning is terror and terrorism. For me, that means drone terror and terrorism. I'll begin with a perception. Most terrorism has not been perpetrated by Islamic identified people. In fact, it strikes me that Islamic identified people have committed only a fraction of the world's terrorism. Most terrorism is large scale and wholesale, not retail. In the 20th and 21st centuries, most terrorism is high-tech and airborne, whether over Guernica, or Dresden, or Nagasaki, or Hiroshima, or Tokyo, or Laos, or Vietnam, or Baghdad, or Gaza. Airborne terrorism is shooting fish in a barrel. In the 21st century, weaponized drones are the favored instrument of this airborne terrorism. And as yet, only two nations, one Christian identified and one Jewish identified, deploy weaponized drones hostilely and systematically. Drones, of course, are the darling of the planet's major terrorist power, the Pentagon. That may be obvious to many in this room, but it's a reality monolithically obscured in U.S. corporate mainstream media. Hence, it's a reality totally not grasped by mainstream USA. Drone terror is not just about the maiming and killing of civilians, or about assassinations and extrajudicial executions, or the violation of national sovereignty, or about a superpower's contempt for international law. Drone terror is also about the enduring fear drones generate, whether in Waziristan, or rural Afghanistan, or wherever. Fear that leads hundreds of thousands to flee their homes and villages. Now, except for Gaza, where trapped in their open-air prison, few can flee. People in Gaza living daily and incessantly under Israeli drones must endure long years of trembling and despair. One way the politicians and mainstream media pull off the big lie about who the terrorists really are is that when they glibly and repeatedly invoke the terrorist boogeyman, they virtually never define the word terror. They never come clean about what terrorism really is. They never explain that terrorism is none other than violence or the threat of violence directed at civilians for political or military ends. On the contrary, the politicians and mainstream media would convince us that terrorism is exclusively what the other guy does. Never what U.S. forces do. These media pimps ignore the intent and effects of such U.S. high-tech terror devices as cruise missiles, or depleted uranium, or white phosphorus, or cluster bombs, or the U.S. nuclear arsenal. The media don't tell us that drones with their Hellfire missiles and 500-pound bombs dismember and incinerate human beings with far less precision than any ISIS beheading. I mentioned fear. The flip side of fear is cowardice. Terrorism, especially airborne terrorism, is cowardly. In many of those demolished cities and regions I cited above, there's little self-defense, little ability to shoot back. The killer-victim ratio is obscene. For example, in the Gaza invasions, the kill ratio has been something like 100 to 1. Now, with drones, that aerial terrorism cowardice is greater by orders of magnitude. There's no killer to shoot back at. Gaza is the barrel. Gazans are the fish. Drone operators, whether in Israel or the US, are totally safe, totally riskless, doing their dirty work tens or hundreds or thousands of miles away from those they incinerate or dismember. The drone crew kills in comfort, in ergonomic chairs, on shift during precise hours, just a daily commute from their spouses and kids, just a few miles along paved roads, from their TVs, their refrigerators, their air conditioning, their plumbing. In upstate New York, where I hail from, the Hancock Killer Drone Base is the home of the 174th Attack Wing. At Hancock, the drone operators and their chain of command are surrounded by high barbed wire fencing and heavily armed guards. But local judges, before whom some of us in this room have appeared many times, have issued orders of protection, a legal device typically meant to protect abused spouses, partners, and kids against scrupulously they've ordered their issues of protection against scrupulously nonviolent drone activists. These orders of protection forbid us to even approach those fences or those guards. The irony, of course, is that those orders of protection protect an operation busy slaughtering innocents elsewhere. Over the years, in various articles and in various forums, my mantra has been, drones are tactically clever, but strategically stupid. Typically, I've gone on to discuss the blowback that weaponized drones generate. I've noted the likely proliferation of drones, pointing out that the day may come when drones are used against domestic enemies of the U.S. power structure. But one day, the White House and the U.S. power structure themselves may be drone targets. The more likely victims, however, are minorities, or dissidents, or legal demonstrators, or simply those out of favor with the reigning party.